The drone of the lawnmower was a deceptive lullaby in Maple Creek Estates, a meticulously manicured suburban haven where every blade of grass, every trimmed hedge, and every freshly painted mailbox seemed to hum with enforced perfection, a perfection relentlessly policed by the tyrannical Homeowners Association, and more specifically, by Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the HOA president, whose smile was as tight as her hair bun and whose eyes missed absolutely nothing. It was Tuesday, a day that typically involved another passive-aggressive email from the HOA about a misplaced recycling bin or an unapproved shade of beige on the front door. But for Alex Chen, who lived at 140 to Sycamore Lane, Tuesdays often brought a specific, seething annoyance, the ongoing crusade against his Eyesore security cameras. Alex wasn't a paranoid recluse, he was just practical, a software engineer by trade who believed in data and patterns, and after a string of petty garage break-ins 3 years ago that the local police had brushed off as unsolvable, he'd invested heavily in a top-tier surveillance system. For high-definition cameras, strategically placed, gave him comprehensive coverage of his property and a generous swath of the street, including a crucial corner where Sycamore met Oakwood, a corner that, unbeknownst to anyone, was about to become the silent stage for something far more sinister than an overgrown rose bush. The first letter had been polite, a subtle suggestion that the cameras detracted from the aesthetic harmony of the community. The second, a thinly veiled threat of fines if the unsightly protrusions weren't removed. The third, which had arrived just this morning, was an outright demand, citing a bylaw about exterior modifications requiring HOA approval, a bylaw that mysteriously hadn't existed when Alex first installed them. He ran a hand through his perpetually messy brown hair, staring at the email on his monitor, a vein throbbing faintly in his temple. Aesthetics, he muttered, scoffing at the word as if it were a particularly offensive expletive. This wasn't about aesthetics, it was about control, about the illusion of perfect, problem-free living that the HOA desperately clung to, even if it meant ignoring the very real threats that could lurk beneath the surface of their manicured lawns. He sighed, leaning back in his ergonomic chair, deciding to tackle the problem his own way, by compiling a month's worth of incident-free footage to prove the cameras were harmless, perhaps even beneficial, a silent guardian of their precious harmony. It was a fool's errand. He knew. Mrs. Vance wasn't interested in logic, only compliance. Still, it was a productive way to procrastinate on his actual work. He clicked open the surveillance software, the familiar grid of live feeds filling his screen. The sun dappled through the oak trees, casting moving shadows on the pavement. A jogger passed by, headphones on, oblivious. A delivery truck rumbled down the street. Mundane, predictable, exactly what Mrs. Vance wanted. He fast-forwarded through hours of uneventful daytime footage, past the kids riding bikes, the elderly couple walking their poodle, the occasional car wash in a driveway. The night footage was usually even less eventful, just the rhythmic sweep of his porch light, the shadows stretching and shrinking with the moon's progress. He toggled to the feed from the camera mounted on the corner of his garage, the one overlooking the intersection of Sycamore and Oakwood. This was the camera Mrs. Vance particularly loathed, claiming it was too prominent, like a cyclops eye staring at everyone's comings and goings. Alex had argued its strategic value for monitoring the street, especially after the break-ins on nearby Elm Street, but his arguments had fallen on deaf ears. He fast-forwarded through last night's feed. Just after midnight, the street lights cast long, stark shadows. Rain had begun to fall around 1:30 a.m., creating glistening streaks on the lens, but the high definition still pierced through the blur. Then, just as he was about to skip ahead to dawn, he paused. Something flickered on the screen, a subtle aberration in the usual rhythm of the night. He rewound slowly, frame by painstaking frame. It was around 17 a.m. A dark sedan, no lights on, had pulled up, not to a house, but just shy of the intersection, half hidden by Mrs. Albright's overgrown hedges. It lingered for only a few seconds, an unnervingly still presence in the pouring rain. Then, the passenger door opened, a brief flash of interior light, and a figure, cloaked in what looked like a dark, hooded raincoat, emerged. They moved quickly, almost a blur against the dim street lights, not towards a house, but towards the small, unassuming green utility box nestled near the large oak tree on the corner, the very box that housed the main fiber optic lines for the entire neighborhood. The figure fumbled with something at the box, a quick, almost imperceptible movement, and then, just as suddenly, they retreated, slipping back into the sedan, which then glided away, still without headlights, disappearing silently into the rain-soaked night. Alex frowned, leaning closer to the screen. It was too fast, too indistinct to make out details, but the cold dread that prickled at the back of his neck wasn't about a casual late-night delivery or a teenager's prank. This was clandestine, deliberate, and utterly out of place in the sterile, perfect world of Maple Creek Estates. He zoomed in on the fleeting moment, trying to enhance the image, but the rain and the low light pixelated the figure into a ghostly, unidentifiable shape. Yet, the unsettling feeling persisted, a subtle discord in the meticulously maintained symphony of his neighborhood, hinting at a darker note played while the HOA was busy complaining about an eyesore. He had no idea yet just how major, how devastating, that silent, recorded incident truly was, or that his eyesore cameras were about to become the unwilling, sole witness to a crime that would rip the veneer off Maple Creek Estates. The chill that had crept into Alex's study wasn't from the plummeting night temperature. It was the icy tendrils of dread, a feeling that had settled deep in his gut since he'd witnessed the fleeting, unsettling anomaly on his security feed. Sleep was a distant, forgotten concept as he hunched over his monitor, the glowing pixels, the only source of light in the darkened room, a stark contrast to the perfect, sun-drenched facade of Maple Creek Estates. He'd spent hours, meticulously scrubbing through the footage from 2:17 a.m., Tuesday morning, frame by agonizing frame, his fingers flying across the keyboard, zooming, enhancing, sharpening, his breath catching with each minuscule discovery. The figure, initially a mere shadow, slowly began to yield secrets under the relentless scrutiny of Alex's high-tech system. It wasn't just a cloak, it was a high-tech, insulated suit, designed to minimize heat signatures and deflect light, making the person virtually invisible to anything but direct observation. The individual's movements, too, were unnervingly precise, not fumbling at all, but purposeful, the gloved hands expertly manipulating small, sophisticated tools at the side of the green utility box near the old oak tree. As the blurry form gained definition, Alex's jaw tightened. He could make out a small, specialized toolkit, then the glint of what looked like fiber optic cables being carefully, surgically disconnected and rerouted. This wasn't vandalism, it was a professional, highly skilled operation. A cold knot formed in his stomach as he realized the implication. They weren't just tampering with the neighborhood's internet. They were tapping into its very nervous system. He watched, horrified, as the figure installed a small, sleek device now larger than a pack of cards, almost indistinguishable from the existing hardware into the junction box. It hummed briefly, a faint blue light blinking before vanishing, perfectly integrated. This wasn't about stealing packages or breaking into garages. This was about data, about widespread surveillance, about potentially intercepting every bit of digital communication flowing through Maple Creek Estates. This was a major crime, a high-stakes cyber intrusion with the entire neighborhood as its unwitting target. The sheer audacity, the technical sophistication, the audacity of executing it in plain sight on a quiet suburban street was staggering. The implications spun in his mind: financial data, personal information, smart home security systems, all potentially compromised. Just as the full terrifying scope of his discovery began to sink in, a sharp rap echoed from his front door, followed by the distinct sound of a letter being forced through the mail slot. Alex flinched, pulling himself away from the screen, his heart pounding not just from the crime he just witnessed, but from the chilling certainty of who was at his door. He shuffled out, his movements stiff from hours of sitting, and found, not a package, but a thick, official-looking envelope from the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. The letter inside was not merely a passive-aggressive suggestion, it was an unequivocal ultimatum. Dated today, it declared his cameras a flagrant violation of Article 4, Section 3, Subsection B, Paragraph 7 of the HOA Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, citing not just aesthetics, but a newly fabricated clause about potential invasion of privacy. It wasn't a suggestion this time, it was an order. He had 48 hours to completely dismantle and remove all exterior security cameras, failing which he would incur a daily fine of $500, effective immediately, with legal action threatened if compliance wasn't met within a week. The letter coldly stated that if he failed to act, an HOA-approved maintenance crew would be dispatched to perform the removal at his expense. The paper felt like a lead weight in his hand, the ink bleeding into a blur as his vision swam between the stark black text and the chilling blue glow emanating from his study. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. Mrs. Vance and her committee, obsessed with privacy from harmless home surveillance, were utterly oblivious to the true, massive invasion of privacy that had just taken place mere yards from his home, captured perfectly by the very eyesores they demanded he remove. He was caught in an impossible bind. If he complied with the HOA, the only evidence of a serious, potentially devastating crime would vanish, wiped from existence, leaving the entire community vulnerable. If he defied them, he faced crippling fines, a bitter legal battle, and the very real possibility of having his crucial evidence forcibly removed. The urgency clawed at him, a visceral need to act, to expose what he had seen. He had the power, the only power, to shed light on this darkness, but doing so meant stepping directly into the path of the HOA's relentless bureaucratic machine. The chilling thought that perhaps the criminals knew about his cameras, or might even be monitoring them, also flashed through his mind, adding another layer of terrifying complexity to his urgent, solitary decision. The clock was ticking, both for him and for the unsuspecting residents of Maple Creek Estates. The 48-hour ultimatum from the HOA felt less like a deadline and more like a fuse burning down, each tick of the clock amplifying the pressure on Alex. He hadn't slept, fueled by caffeine and a potent cocktail of fear and indignation. The choice was stark: comply with the petty tyranny of Mrs. Vance and erase the only evidence of a sophisticated cybercrime, or defy them and face financial ruin and legal battles, all while trying to convince a skeptical police force of an invisible threat. He chose defiance. The integrity of his neighborhood, the privacy of its residents, felt like a far greater stake than a few $1,000s in fines or the wrath of a power-hungry HOA president. His first call, made in the pre-dawn quiet, was to the non-emergency police line. He tried to explain, calmly, concisely, about the suspicious activity, the utility box, the professional-looking figure. The dispatcher, bless her heart, sounded bored, advising him to file an online report for suspicious persons and suggesting he contact his internet provider if he thought his service was affected. Frustrated but undeterred, Alex gathered his courage, copied the relevant footage onto a secure drive, and drove to the Maple Creek Police Department. The station was a sterile, fluorescent-lit labyrinth. After an hour of waiting, he was finally ushered into a small, windowless room by Detective Miller, a man whose weary eyes and perpetually slumped shoulders suggested a long career of dealing with everything from stolen garden gnomes to domestic disputes, but perhaps not high-tech cyber espionage in a suburban cul-de-sac. Alex laid out his case, trying to sound credible, professional, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. He described the hooded figure, the specialized tools, the precise manipulation of the fiber optic box, the installation of the unknown device. He presented the USB drive, pointing to the timestamps, the subtle movements, Detective Miller listened, nodding occasionally, but his gaze seemed to drift, lingering more on the peeling paint on the wall than on the gravity of Alex's words. "So, Mr. Chen," Miller began, his voice a low monotone, "you're saying someone was messing with your internet box, and you think this is a major crime?" He picked up the USB drive, turning it over in his hand as if it were a foreign object. "Look, Mr. Chen, we get a lot of calls about suspicious activity. Most of the time, it's kids pranking, or a utility worker doing late-night maintenance. And honestly, we're stretched thin with actual break-ins, car thefts, that sort of thing." Alex felt a surge of exasperation. "Detective, this wasn't a prank. This was a professional. They installed a device. This could be about data theft, surveillance, identity theft on a massive scale for the entire neighborhood." Miller offered a tight, almost imperceptible smile. "I understand your concern, sir, and we appreciate you coming in. We'll log this footage, have our tech guy take a look when he has a moment. But frankly, unless there's a clear victim, a reported loss, or a direct threat, our resources are focused elsewhere. And frankly, your HOA has been calling us about your cameras for weeks. They say they're an eyesore and a privacy concern. You sure this isn't just a reaction to that?" The implication hung in the air. Alex was just a disgruntled homeowner trying to justify his eyesore cameras. Alex's shoulders slumped. He tried to explain the HOA's arbitrary rules, the new ultimatum, how it all tied into his desperate need to prove the camera's value, but Miller just nodded, a practiced, non-committal gesture. He promised to look into it, a phrase that, in Alex's experience, usually meant file it away and forget about it. Alex left the station feeling more isolated than ever, the weight of his discovery pressing down on him, unheard, unheeded. The HOA's response to his noncompliance was swift and brutal. The 48-hour deadline passed, and by noon the next day, a bright yellow notice was affixed to his front door, visible to every passing neighbor. It wasn't just a fine. It was a formal notice of violation and intent to impose lien, detailing the $500 daily fine and threatening to place a lien on his property if the cameras weren't removed within 7 days. Even worse, the HOA email list, usually reserved for mundane announcements, buzzed with veiled accusations and thinly veiled gossip. Mrs. Vance, in a community-wide email, lamented certain residents' disregard for community standards and the privacy of their neighbors, a clear jab at Alex. He felt eyes on him as he left for work, whispers following him as he checked his mailbox. His neighbors, usually friendly, now offered curt nods or avoided eye contact, clearly swayed by the HOA's narrative. He was being ostracized, painted as the rogue element, the troublemaker. The pressure mounted, a two-pronged assault from the petty bureaucracy of the HOA and the dismissive indifference of law enforcement. He spent another sleepless night, replaying the footage, searching for anything, any detail, that would force the police to take him seriously. He zoomed in on the utility box again, his eyes aching from staring at the screen. The device was so small, so perfectly integrated. But then, he noticed something new, something he'd missed in his initial panic, as the dark-clad figure worked. For a fraction of a second, a faint, almost imperceptible reflection appeared on the polished surface of the utility box itself. It was fleeting, distorted by the rain, but it was there, the reflection of a small, distinctive emblem, perhaps, on the figure's tool or even a part of their suit. It was too blurry to identify, but the shape was unique, almost like a stylized, jagged lightning bolt or a fragmented star. And then, as the figure retreated, their hand brushed against the tree trunk, leaving behind a faint, almost invisible, smudge. It wasn't mud or dirt, it was a faint, metallic sheen, barely there, but unmistakable under the camera's high-definition lens. This wasn't just a random cyber attack. There was a signature, a trace. This wasn't just about the internet. It was about something tangible, something left behind. The realization sent a fresh wave of cold dread through him. The danger wasn't just abstract data theft. It was a physical presence, a tangible threat that had been right on his doorstep, and the Eyesore cameras were the only proof. He was in this alone, caught between a hidden enemy and an oblivious, hostile community, and the clock was still ticking. The faint, metallic sheen on the tree trunk and the cryptic emblem reflected in the utility box became Alex's new obsession, a desperate lifeline in the isolating sea of HOA threats and police apathy. He spent another grueling night, this time, not just replaying the footage, but meticulously cross-referencing every detail with public databases, scientific forums, and even obscure art, history sites, anything that might shed light on that elusive symbol. His apartment became a war room, screens glowing with fragmented images and complex search queries, the silence broken only by the frantic clicks of his mouse and the distant, imagined whispers of Mrs. Vance's condemnations. He pored over forums discussing advanced materials, then shifted to industrial design, feeling like a digital detective chasing a ghost. Just as frustration threatened to engulf him, a late-night search for unique industrial Logos metal finish yielded a hit. A small, independent tech firm based in a neighboring state, specializing in high-grade, miniaturized drone technology, and advanced stealth components for private security firms. Their logo, a stylized, almost predatory hawk with jagged wings, matched the brief reflection he'd seen. A cold dread settled in his stomach. Drone technology, stealth components. This wasn't just a simple data tap. This was something far more sophisticated, a potential espionage operation or a major corporate hack, and it suddenly felt too big, too dangerous for a single homeowner to handle. He immediately zoomed in on the metallic smudge on the tree trunk, analyzing its composition through the camera's high-definition lens, cross-referencing it with samples of high-grade alloys used in drone construction. The pattern of residue, almost microscopic, was consistent with a specialized alloy found only in certain high-end, discrete surveillance drones. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. They hadn't just tapped the fiber optic line. They had likely deployed a microdrone to collect data wirelessly from within homes, a quiet, almost undetectable invasion. The utility box was just the entry point for their network. This realization hit him like a physical blow. His Eyesore cameras hadn't just recorded a crime. They had recorded the installation of a widespread, invasive surveillance system targeting every smart device, every Wi-Fi signal, every connected life in Maple Creek Estates. Armed with this terrifying new evidence, Alex knew he couldn't wait for Detective Miller to have a moment. He tried calling Miller's direct line repeatedly, leaving increasingly urgent voicemails. When those went unreturned, he emailed the raw footage segment showing the emblem and the metallic residue, along with his analysis and the tech firm's details. He even attached snippets of the HOA's threatening letters, hoping to demonstrate his current predicament and the desperate need for police intervention. Hours later, just as Alex was contemplating driving back to the station and demanding to speak to Miller's supervisor, his phone finally rang. It was Detective Miller, but his voice was different, no longer dismissive, but sharp, alert, tinged with a new urgency. "Mr. Chen, I'm reviewing your email, that emblem ... and the alloy. Can you bring that full footage back down here, immediately? We've had a development. A major one." Alex practically flew to the station, the USB drive clutched in his sweaty palm. This time, there was no waiting. Miller met him at the door, already looking at a tablet displaying Alex's images. "You were right, Mr. Chen. We ... underestimated the scope of this." He led Alex into a larger office where a younger, tech-savvy officer was already poring over a blown-up image of the hawk emblem. "This logo," the officer explained, "belongs to Ghostline Solutions, a company that's been under federal investigation for months regarding highly advanced, untraceable surveillance tech. They're suspected of selling to ... unsavory clients." We just got a tip today about their presence in suburban communities, setting up covert monitoring networks. Your footage, Mr. Chen, is the first definitive proof we have of an active installation. Alex felt a dizzying mix of relief and terror. Relief that he was finally believed, terror at the magnitude of what he'd uncovered. The police rapidly escalated their response. Within hours, a team of federal agents, experts in cybercrime, descended upon Maple Creek Estates, a stark contrast to the small-town police presence. They swarmed the corner near the utility box, carefully extracting the installed device Alex had identified, using specialized tools and forensic techniques. The neighborhood, usually so quiet, buzzed with flashing lights, official vehicles, and hushed conversations. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, their curiosity quickly turning to alarm as they saw the seriousness of the situation. The news quickly spread. This wasn't a petty vandal. It was a professional operation, and their privacy had been deeply compromised. The HOA's reaction was nothing short of a dramatic, public implosion. Mrs. Vance, who had been orchestrating a public, shaming campaign against Alex, was suddenly speechless, her rigid composure cracking under the weight of the unfolding crisis. Federal agents, upon learning of the HOA's demand for camera removal, had sternly informed Mrs. Vance that hindering a federal investigation was a serious offense. The irony was exquisite and painful for her. Overnight, Alex went from being the neighborhood pariah, the man with the Eyesore cameras, to an accidental hero, the unsung guardian whose vigilance had averted a potentially catastrophic breach. Neighbors who had previously avoided him now approached with apologies, wide-eyed questions, and profound gratitude. The $500 daily fines were immediately rescinded, and a formal, albeit grudging, apology email was sent by the HOA, acknowledging Alex's unforeseen critical contribution to community safety. However, this newfound recognition came with its own set of challenges. While many thanked him, others viewed him with suspicion, wondering why his cameras had caught it, if he was somehow involved, or if he knew more than he let on. The very nature of the crime, the silent, pervasive invasion of privacy, left a lingering paranoia in the neighborhood, and Alex, the one who saw it all, inadvertently became a focal point for that unease. He also knew that while the immediate threat might be contained, the people behind Ghostline Solutions were just going to disappear. His name was now on police reports, tied directly to thwarting their operation. He had unmasked them, and, in doing so, he had potentially made himself a target. The quiet suburban life he'd sought in Maple Creek Estates was gone, replaced by a new, unsettling reality where vigilance was no longer just a hobby, but a necessary, dangerous burden. The true fight, he sensed, was only just beginning. The resolution of the crime unfolded with a speed that left Maple Creek Estates reeling, a stark contrast to the initial bureaucratic inertia. The device extracted from the utility box, a marvel of miniaturized surveillance technology, was quickly analyzed by federal agents. It was far more insidious than Alex had initially imagined, not just a data tap, but a sophisticated network hub designed to passively collect ambient data from every smart device, every unencrypted Wi-Fi signal, and every digital footprint within a half-mile radius. Ghostline Solutions, as the federal agents explained, was a front for a highly organized, international corporate espionage ring. They weren't interested in credit card numbers. They were after intellectual property, proprietary algorithms, and high-level financial strategies from the numerous tech executives and venture capitalists who resided in affluent, seemingly secure communities like Maple Creek. The data they planned to exfiltrate was worth billions, capable of crippling rival companies and manipulating global markets. Within days, the federal investigation expanded, leading to raids across multiple states. Several key figures from Ghostline Solutions were apprehended, including their lead engineer, whose distinctive, jagged hawk emblem was found etched onto a specialized tool in his possession. precisely matching the fleeting reflection Alex had captured. The arrest sent shockwaves through the tech world and, more intimately, through Maple Creek Estates. It turned out that a seemingly innocuous new resident, a quiet data analyst who had moved in just 3 months prior, was a crucial local operative, responsible for scouting locations and providing intelligence on the neighborhood's digital infrastructure. His arrest, broadcast on local news, shattered the last vestiges of the community's illusion of impenetrable safety. The crime wasn't just solved, it was dismantled, its intricate web of deceit exposed, thanks to the vigilance of one man and his Eyesore cameras. For Alex, the aftermath was a whirlwind of interviews, commendations, and an unsettling shift in his personal landscape. He was hailed as a reluctant hero, his name appearing in local newspapers and even a brief mention on national news. Neighbors who had once scowled at his cameras now approached him with apologies and gratitude, some even asking for advice on installing their own security systems. His expertise, once dismissed as paranoia, was now sought after. He received job offers from cybersecurity firms, invitations to speak at community safety forums, and even a formal letter of appreciation from the mayor's office. Yet, this newfound recognition came with a profound sense of unease. The quiet, predictable life he had cherished was irrevocably altered. He had seen the underbelly, the chilling reality that even in the most idyllic settings, malevolent forces could operate unseen. His vigilance had saved his community, but it had also stolen his innocence. Sleep, though more consistent now, was still occasionally punctuated by the ghostly image of the hooded figure, a constant reminder that the world was far less secure than it appeared. He found himself constantly scanning his surroundings, his mind instinctively analyzing potential threats, a permanent shift in his perception. He was no longer just Alex Chen, software engineer. He was Alex Chen, the man who saw too much, the unintended guardian. The long-term impact on Maple Creek Estates was profound. The illusion of perfection, so carefully cultivated by the HOA, had been irrevocably shattered. The manicured lawns and pristine facades now seemed to whisper of vulnerability. A new, more pragmatic sense of community emerged from the ashes of shattered complacency. Neighborhood watch programs, once a quaint formality, became active and engaged. Residents, previously hesitant to invest in visible security, now openly discuss camera systems, alarm installations, and even shared neighborhood watch apps. The very concept of privacy was reevaluated. It was no longer about hiding from neighbors' cameras, but about protecting oneself from unseen, digital threats. The fear of external intrusion had ironically brought the community closer, fostering a shared understanding of collective security. And what of the security cameras, the initial eyesores? They were no longer a point of contention. Alex's cameras, once the subject of Mrs. Vance's relentless ire, became symbols of proactive protection. The HOA, thoroughly chastened and publicly embarrassed, underwent a significant transformation. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, her iron grip on community aesthetics loosened by the stark reality of a federal investigation, quietly stepped down from her presidency, citing personal reasons. Her replacement, a younger, more technologically aware resident, immediately initiated a review of the HOA bylaws. The infamous Article 4, Section 3, Subsection B, Paragraph 7, which had targeted Alex's cameras, was not merely rescinded. It was replaced with a new clause actively encouraging residents to install modern security systems, even offering guidance on best practices. The HOA's focus shifted dramatically from petty aesthetic policing to genuine community safety and technological preparedness. They even started exploring options for a centralized community surveillance system, a concept that would have been unthinkable just months prior. Alex's cameras remained, now not just tolerated, but celebrated. They were a constant, silent reminder of the day the perfect facade cracked, revealing the dangers beneath, and of the ordinary man who, by simply refusing to look away, had become the unlikely hero. He still lived at 140 to Sycamore Lane, but Maple Creek Estates was no longer the same, and neither was he. The conflict with the HOA was over, replaced by a grudging respect, and the neighborhood, though scarred, was now more resilient, more aware, and perhaps truly safer, all because of an eyesore that saw what no one else would,